A lot of times people get overwhelmed. If you have money, you don't have a problem. If you have money saved up, then you can find someone like me and we'll find you a deal. If you don't have the time, then you have to think about, okay, so what strategy am I going to focus on? Maybe I'm going to take an extra 2 shifts a month for a year or two, and I'm going to put that money away until I have enough that I can get into a deal.
Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast, the show where we teach you how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want.
Doctor! 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 Doctor!
Now, here's your host, Dr. Alex Schloe.
Welcome to another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Schloe, and as always, I'm so glad that you're taking the time to listen to another episode. Today, we had my new friend, Dr. Dan Grove, on the podcast. He is a pulmonary and critical care physician who once thrived in a successful practice before it was taken over by a large corporate health system. He learned that this hostile acquisition stripped him away of his sense of control as a physician and his future employment. It also impacted how he practiced medicine and led to him shaping his future in a different way. In order to regain autonomy, he turned to real estate investing as an alternative source of income that has led him to practice medicine and live life how he wants to. And he wants to help others achieve similar success. In this episode, we talk about multiple different facets of real estate investing, such as co-living, house hacking, how to get started, how to build your team, and out-of-state investing. This was an incredible podcast episode. This is going to be great for beginners, and this is going to be great for experienced real estate investors. I guarantee you will take something and learn something from this podcast episode. If you do, please take some time, leave us a 5-star rating or review, and subscribe to this podcast. That is how the podcast grows. So without any further ado, let's get started with today's episode with my new friend, Dr. Dan Grove. Dr. Dan Grove, welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. How are things going over there in Maryland?
It's nice. It's cloudy, but it's nice.
Good deal.
We're out of summer. I hopefully stop sweating soon.
The humidity there is next level. I'm from Virginia. I know all about that.
Oh, yeah.
I actually headed back there in a couple of days. I am not looking forward to the humidity. Here in Colorado, we just don't have any of that.
I know. I grew up in Arizona. I don't do well with humidity.
Absolutely. Excited to have you on the show. If folks don't know who you are, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a critical care doctor. I do pulmonary and critical care medicine. I did all my training at Emory. This was unintentional. Plugging my alma mater. Maybe this will count since I don't give them any donations because of how much money I gave them during my training. But it'll count this as free advertising. I trained at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, but I went to medical school at Emory and actually stayed there. I was there for 10 years. I did internal medicine residency and fellowship there. They called us Emeroids, the ones that just stayed the whole time, because I really liked Atlanta and I really liked the training there. But I married a Jersey girl. So I moved to New Jersey for a couple of years, but being from Arizona, I couldn't do Jersey. People were a little too intense for me. Wonderful people, but just I got really stressed. We ended up moving to Baltimore, which is like a compromise. It's close to family, but it's not too like New York, New Jersey, big city-ish. I worked for a private practice. It was actually the largest pulmonary and critical care practice in the region in the Northeast that was independent. We had a lot of stuff going on. I was a junior partner. I just started building equity in the practice. We had a DME company for sleep supplies. We had a billing company, a collections company. It was cool to be a part of that. I really liked being a part of something that wasn't just medicine. The majority of our revenue, though, was we had a contract to work in the hospitals and the intensive care units. We were the contracted sole providers in the intensive care unit. That's where we made the majority of our income from the billing from that. In the middle of the pandemic, halfway through the Delta wave, when I don't know if anybody know it, being an intensive care doctor during the Delta wave of the COVID pandemic was not fun. If somebody would just describe to me they were describing something that happened in 2021, 2022. They're just this happened back in 2000 in COVID. Because that whole 3 years is just one long year. 2021 was the longest decade of my life. Right in the middle of that, when we're all working crazy. We were overflowing vent patients onto different floors in the hospital. We're doing all kinds of crazy, seeing 25 patients in a day, people on any vent forever, and not just a vented patient. If you work in medicine, these people were on crazy vent settings where these are the type of patients where if you turned them, just moving them, their oxygen would go so low that you would be worried that they were going to code. In the middle of all that, the hospital system sends an email that says, you need to become our employees, otherwise you can't work in our hospital anymore. It was a violation of the contract, but listen, we were a relatively large private practice, but compared to this big health system, we're not going to go to court against a multi-billion-dollar corporation's attorneys. Our options were, we either become their employees or we move out of the city, essentially, to find another system, because there's all the non-compete clauses. I'd have to move like 10 miles. I couldn't practice within 10 miles of any of their facilities, and this is a regional health system. They're everywhere. They have an urgent care center 20 miles away. I got to go 10 miles beyond that. I got like really anxious. I was like, at any moment, some entity which doesn't necessarily think about me as their primary goal could just drop a hammer, or they can tell me I got to see more patients. They got to tell me I got to do this compliance and that compliance. And I got really nervous that I just like felt like a total loss of control. I started looking into other avenues of income. I never wanted to stop being a doctor. I love my job. And I even like working in the hospitals I work for. By the way, I don't think the health system is like evil. It's just they're making business decisions, and they have to do that because that's their bottom line. This was a better business decision for them. I was just sort of a collateral damage. My whole life was collateral damage to that decision they had to make. I needed to look into other forms of income. I had an experience investing in real estate after the crash in 2008. It was a positive and negative experience. It was positive financially, but it was negative in that I was totally overwhelmed. I didn't know what was going on. I'd never been a landlord. I didn't know about bigger pockets. There's no books that I knew about. I just sort of did it because I had a friend who was successful doing it. He's like, oh, you got to do it. And I'm like, okay, fire, aim, ready. I just did it. And it was like a little overwhelming. I was finishing my training. I was moving. I had 3 small children. I sold those houses. And just to give you an idea of the regret for me, ready? I bought 2 houses in Atlanta, Georgia for $35,000 each. I sold them and I made a decent amount of money relative to my investment. I wake up from sleep in a cold sweat when I think about how much these houses are worth now. No, I'm exaggerating. I knew about it. I knew this was the path. If you want to be a physician, and there's no more rich doctors anymore. If you want to be a rich doctor, anybody who knows a rich doctor, they own a business or they own their practice or they are a plastic surgeon working for cash only or something like that. They're doing something. They own an urgent care center. My neighbor he works for a guy who opened weight loss clinics. That guy's making a fortune.
It's unbelievable.
Those are the rich doctors. But I said, I wanted to be able to make income and not have to worry, FU money as they call it. Then if the hospital says you're done or you need to do this, you do that, I can be like, no, thank you. And so that with intensive care, I love it, but you can burn out if you, at some point you're like, I'm old enough for this, too old for this, that I could back off. I wanted to be in control of my life, essentially. Like, who doesn't want that? I took a home equity loan. I had some money saved and I started reading Bigger Pockets. I read a bunch of books and I did all the podcasts. I got excited about bird investing, but the problem is that Baltimore was too expensive for that. I bought 2 houses in Detroit that were inexpensive and I got those set up. But then I heard there's a gentleman named Pace Morby who talks about creative finance. I heard him on a podcast and I got really excited about that avenue. I joined his mentorship and his community, and then I started buying houses with creative finance, sub-2, seller finance combinations.
I hate to interrupt you.
Interrupt anytime you want.
I do want to bring up Pace Morby and the sub-2 community and creative financing. For folks who don't understand subject 2 or what creative financing is, do you mind explaining that?
Absolutely. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, there has been a great conspiracy, a lie that is put upon the citizens of this country, which is that the only way to buy a house is you find a real estate agent and a bank. The real estate agent finds you the house and then the bank will give you the mortgage. Or if you sell your house, you need a real estate agent, you need to sell somebody who has a mortgage. I promise you, you will Google this and you will find real estate agents and banks telling you that's the only way. But in reality, you can buy a house. It's a free country. Alex, if I wanted to say, I'm selling you my house and we're drunk, well, maybe not drunk. Maybe we're not drunk yet, but we're at a bar and we're drinking O'Doul's. I think if you're drunk, it probably voids the contract. But we get on a piece of paper and say, Alex, I get a bar napkin. I write down, I'm selling you my house for $400,000. And you're going to pay me $1,500 a month for 30 years. I sign it and you sign it. I just sold you my house. We get a witness. We go to the county assessor's office, we register, we do the paperwork, transfer the deed. You can sell a house any way you want. You can buy a house in a lot of different ways. And people have been doing it for centuries. There's 2 ways that we focus on that. One is if somebody can sell me their house and then I pay them like they're the bank. I'll give you an example. I got a house in North Georgia that we use as an Airbnb. And the lady that sold it to me, she owned it outright. And she had actually bought it to give to her son so that he could have some income. But then he shacked up with some girl and wasn't interested. She seemed very bitter about it. But whatever. I'm happy. Thank God for him. And blessings on their future home together. She says, okay, so you pay me, we'll set up a mortgage document and I'm paying her at a 6% rate. I gave her a down payment and I pay her monthly. We have automatic sort of deposits in her account every month. Now the deed was transferred. I just bought the house from her instead of sending my money to a bank where they'll do their financial colonoscopy on you. And I just did the Cologuard. I thank God I was saved from a colonoscopy. I don't want the banks doing it to me either. I don't have to pay an agent commission. I don't have to pay the bank's fees. I don't have to go through all their hoops. And we agreed on it. I found there's people that will make sure the paperwork is all correct. I bought the house from her. That's called buying with seller finance or owner financing. It's seller carryback. There's a lot of terms for it. Another way you could buy a house is called subject to. That sub to is what it's called. That means you're buying a house subject to the existing mortgage. That's where that comes from. What that means is you buy the house, but you keep the mortgage in place. And then I would pay the mortgage payments. I think it's always easier to do an example. There is a house in Baltimore. There's a lady who bought her house. She had it remodeled. She was doing fine. And then her work moved her. She had zero equity in the house, but she had a 3.5% interest rate. If she would have sold her house, when accounting for agent commissions, closing costs, she would have had to spend at closing about $30,000. She would have had to lose $30,000 on the sale of her house. What we did was we said, okay, we gave her $15,000. I gave her $15,000 as a down payment. Then I pay her mortgage every month, which is still in her name. That's called buying sub to. I'm paying her payments every month. I have a company that's called a servicing company. That company will withdraw money from my account and send it to her mortgage. It's done automatically. That's called buying subject to. Those are the two, and you can kind of combine those sometimes. You can get more complicated, but those are the two ways to buy with creative finance. That's what the Great Pace Morby taught me. That's what I learned. That's the strategy we focus on primarily.
It's a really great way to do it. We actually just did that on one of our latest deals for assisted living. The beauty of it is it's an opportunity for both folks to win, the buyer and the seller. For example, for ours that we did, it was an off-market deal. We sent some direct mailers. They came back, mom and pop. They want to sell their assisted living business and their home. I just talked to them like, what do you guys want? And they're like, well, we don't really care that much about a down payment, but we do want cash flow. We're getting ready to retire. It's like, great, this will be perfect. So they were like, we just want $45,000 down. And this was a $750,000 house, so a 6% down payment, which you can never do at the bank, especially for a commercial property. We're paying them 6% over 30-year amortization. We have a balloon payment set up in 10 years if we need to, if we don't refinance before then, and a prepayment penalty. And they're like, this is great. We're getting $4,000 a month to just go sit Mai Tais on the beach for a property they already had paid, which is a lot of creative ways to do it where you can win and the seller can win. I think about it a lot, and I've heard that you can either pay my price on your terms or your price on my terms. That's kind of how you can think about it.
You can structure things so that people if they want a higher monthly payment, you can adjust the terms, you can do whatever you want. That's why it's called creative. And everybody wins. It's not just you and the seller that win in that situation. All the people that live in that house win because had they sold the house just straight out, it might have stopped being an assisted living. Somebody might have turned it into something else, like a primary residence or an Airbnb or who knows, some other type of house. The only people that lose in creative finance are the banks. And I'm not shedding a tear. Like they seem to be doing okay.
Yeah, they'll be just fine. A great way for folks to get into deals who maybe don't have that capital saved up for a down payment, or they want to stretch their money further and utilize the velocity of money. I mean, there's a lot of great ways to do it, and not to mention get deals that would otherwise not be available, like the Georgia Airbnb property that you mentioned. There's just so much opportunity in that space, and I agree with you. I think that we were all kind of brainwashed to believe you only can get a house if you go through a bank and get a 30-year fixed mortgage or whatever, 20% down, 25% down, and go from there. That's just not the case. You can just grow so much faster. I've heard of folks that have like bought deals $1 down and they're doing a 50-year amortization to pay a lower monthly payment. There's just so many different ways you can structure it. It's encouraging for people who are listening to this, even like residents, for example, are listening to this. You might not have a lot of money saved up and you want to get started. Creative financing might be the way to do that for you.
For sure. Yeah. Now I'm at the point where since I used up my own capital to buy deals, actually the last 3, I haven't spent any money on the deal because I found the house and then I found somebody who would lend me the money. In one case, and there's a lot of people they don't know about, they want to get into real estate investing, and there's sort of like different categories. One is the group of people, they want to get into real estate investing, but they don't want to do anything. Then there's a group of people that want to get into real estate investing and they want to do it themselves, but they are overwhelmed by the amount of information and they don't know where to get started. And those two groups, I actually have my last 2 deals sort of illustrate both those experiences. I have a deal in Denver that's going to be a co-living property that we closed on last week, where the investor gave me the total cost of entry, like the down payment and the rehab costs and all that stuff. enough. The exchange, she's getting 50% of everything. She's called a private money partner, a private equity partner. And in the process, learning a lot about, this is going to be a co-living house, like a pad split co-living type of house. She gets into the deal. She learns about the processes, and then she's going to want to do more on her own. She's going to learn through this experience. I have another one in Baltimore where a guy I work with is just going to lend me the money for the entry fee, and I'm paying him an interest rate. I pay him in 10% a month. It's just a loan that he's going to make whatever, I don't remember how many hundreds of dollars a month you just get in his checking account. He doesn't want to know. He doesn't care. He's happy. He'll check in with me every once in a while. How's it going? But as long as the checks are coming, that's all he wants. We're bringing those opportunities so people can get into these deals without even using their money if they know how to do it. But it's a great opportunity for people without as much money. The creative deals usually require much less to get into them.
It's a great way to do it. To physicians that are listening to this, it's a great way. You just mentioned literally mailbox money. Like, hey, you can wire me over money for the down payment and I'll send you money on a promissory note that's backed by the property. Everybody, it doesn't get easier than that. Now, of course, like if you're trading, it's a spectrum of like passivity for return. You're probably going to get a little bit less return than the other person who partnered with you is getting 50%. Right. She's loaning more capital. She's being more involved, those sorts of things too. It's a spectrum, but yeah, it's such a great way for folks who are getting started or physicians who are like, hey, I don't have the time or the knowledge, or I don't want to take the time to learn it because the information's out there, to get involved investing and benefit from real estate investing, because there's a ton of different benefits, of course. Dan, let's talk about co-living, because I don't think we've talked about that much. We've talked about house hacking here on the podcast before, which is similar, but tell folks a little bit about co-living if you don't mind.
Yeah, so co-living, I think exploding a lot recently. Co-living is essentially, instead of somebody renting a house, they rent a room in the house. That's the simple version. But there's a spectrum of how that looks, especially recently with the rising rent rates, which have been just like way high. There's a lot of people who can't afford, a lot of single people that can't afford a full studio or one bedroom apartment. Maybe they can't afford $1,500 a month for a studio apartment, but they can afford $700 a month for the room. And it's that or nothing. This is one of the solutions to the housing crisis. The governments generally want to work, they do everything in their power to improve affordable housing except for build more housing. The affordable housing crisis is a process of supply and demand. There's not enough supply. These are homes where you have a home with 6 bedrooms. It's a bigger house that you could rent to a single family, or you could rent to 6 individuals. And there's working guys and girls who are doing maybe sort of seasonal labor. These houses are month to month. They don't want to sign a lease for a whole month and then have to find people to sublease or have to find roommates. These can be in sort of low income areas. They can be low income housing, or they can actually be pretty high income. There's a lot of people who are turning their Airbnbs into co-living, where there's a subset of people who are in the younger range. There's like some people who they don't like committing to things in life. They don't want to commit to anything. Job, city, house, nothing. They will rent a room in this house and move into a city, take a job, and then they're not tied down. If they don't like it, they leave. They don't have to find sublease. They don't have to sign a year-long lease. People are renting houses with indoor basketball courts and stuff like that, where everybody rents a room and they pay whatever, $1,200 a month. And then they also get like a social part of that. It's a community. These are nice houses. And that's the whole spectrum. So people will rent by the room. In Denver, they're more in the lower income range. The one in Denver I just got is in a nice neighborhood. It's not on a street. It's like in a weird location in the neighborhoods. It's mixed commercial, residential. It's not the type of thing that somebody would want to live in with a family, but it's close to downtown. It's close to public transportation. So people would rent it by the room. The one I got in Baltimore is the same. It's going to have 6 bedrooms. It's going to be an affordable place for people to live. That's nice. It's fully remodeled. I don't believe in being a slumlord. This is a nice house. We're going to find nice tenants that this is a better option for them. There's a lot of divorced people who are transitioning, people who are working 6 months, putting in fiber optic cable for Verizon, and people who are college students that are on a budget. There's a lot of people that are in this category that it used to be in a lot of these cities, they could rent an apartment, but they can't anymore because it's too expensive. That's co-living. There's companies like Pad Split is one that will help. Pad Split works as like a middle person that connects the renters to the landlords and acts as the screening and tenant placement. It kind of works like Airbnb in that you can do ratings and stuff like that. You can do approvals. There's one called Alcove, which is in some cities in the Southeast that does a similar thing, but at a higher end. There are individual property managers, like the one in Denver. I found a property manager that this is his business model. He has 55 of these houses, and this is what he does. He knows this kind of thing. I had my wife, everybody on the podcast.
Hi, how are you? We got to meet earlier. If you look at the numbers for that house in Denver, what would it look like if you rented it out long-term compared to what are you expecting renting it out as a co-living property?
I think as a long-term rental, the rate would be about $3,200 a month. As a co-living, it'll be $5,250.
That's awesome.
The expenses are higher for co-living because you have to pay utilities and you have to do things like you have to pay a lawn guy and you have to pay a cleaner to come every once in a while, but it's definitely a higher return.
That's awesome. The property manager, did he kind of give you an estimate on how long folks tend to stay in these properties? Is it frequent churn or do folks tend to actually end up staying for 6 months, a year or longer?
It depends on the house and the locations. He told me, depending on his locations, probably the nicer ones are going to be longer. He says he averages 2 years. I don't know what pad splits numbers are, but everybody's going to be different. A lot of times people stay long-term. Like they will stay long-term. A lot of people get nervous signing the lease and being stuck. That makes people nervous because you never know. You lose your job, whatever. You have to move. This way, you're never going to have to cover a half a year's of rent.
Absolutely. Did you have creative financing, sub 2? How did you find the deal in Denver?
The model that I've taken on is I hired operations manager and we're setting up systems where we have wholesalers. You guys talk about wholesalers?
We have, yeah.
So wholesalers will actually email us deals and we then sort of churn through those to find ones that work. There's a lot of criteria in terms of the finances, in terms of the location. We're building systems where we can sort of underwrite those and vet the deals to find the good ones and connect with people who want to invest in these kind of things. Like we said before, either a lender or an equity partner, and then acquire the properties that way.
That's awesome. You got deals kind of all over the place. How is it being a doc and managing, if you do, these deals that are all over?
I don't manage them, thank God. I always hire property managers. It's funny. In the beginning, I was like, I need to see these houses and I need to be close by. At the time in Baltimore, the houses were a little too expensive. That's why I said before I went to Detroit. But before I went to Detroit, I started looking in York, Pennsylvania. So York, Pennsylvania is about 45 minutes north of where I live, hour maybe. It's pretty close. It's a less expensive market. There's a big college, big hospital system there. It's like a very small / medium-sized city. But that's where I went. I connected with an agent. I did all the classic things. I had to find an agent because I was brainwashed also. Agent, and I was going to get approval from a bank, those whole things. What happened was a couple things. I missed on a lot of deals because I wasn't able to get there because of my schedule. I had to find a day when I was off. I get days off because I work shifts, but it wasn't working. Or I would go with the agent and I was like, show me the place. I'm looking at the place. I'm like nodding, interesting place. And I realized I don't have a clue. I don't even know what I'm looking at. This is the HVAC system. Oh, it's rectangular. It's a little shiny. I was probably good. I don't know, a boiler from a furnace, from a water. I learned a lot about that stuff since then. But at the time I didn't know. I was like, well, why am I wasting my time going to these places when I'm losing deals and I don't even know what I'm looking at? I said, okay, well, I'd much rather find somebody who's expert in the area. Because even in Baltimore, I'm here, I know the city. I don't know every inch of the city. And even if I did, I don't know every inch of the city with respect to what renters want or what renters will pay or what a good house is. You're always better off with an expert. I think. A property manager that's been working in a city for 10 years is going to tell you everything you need. If I could connect with a property manager in the age of Zoom, I could connect with a doctor in Colorado Springs, then I can connect with anyone anywhere. I can have somebody on ground that can take videos. The first house I got, I found an agent who helped me and he told me about the neighborhoods and he told me about the streets and he took videos and he knows more than I do. And then I found a property management company who knows how to manage these things. So I was like, well, what? I don't need to be there. I've never even been to Detroit. Still haven't, but everything's remote. So I said, well, if I can do it Detroit, then why should I be limited to a specific market? The other thing is I found myself totally overwhelmed by all the intricacies of picking the market. I was looking at migration patterns of people, job growth, and all that stuff. Yogi Berra, one of my favorite baseball players, says the problem with predictions is that they're about the future. I don't know how you can predict which market is going to be better or worse, but I know that if you find a house that cash flows in any market, that's a good investment. So why should I focus on one market? Then I started doing that. And now I have sort of a system where we find the people who are local, we meet with them, we sort of vet the local folks, and then we use the local folks to get the information we need. Like the house in Denver, I connected with this property manager. The property manager is going to get me 3 contractor bids. I could get 3 contractor bids, but I'm not good at vetting contractors. And when a contractor gets a call from him, they are going to be more likely to be responsive to him. I had this happen in a house in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I was getting nowhere with the contractors. I finally found the property manager and he got it taken care of in like 2 weeks because he managed 150 houses. If the contractor gives him a hard time, that contractor is going to lose a lot of business. The contractor ghosts me, they didn't lose much. Having somebody local, agents, property managers, handymen are great. Handymen are great for evaluating a property because a handyman doesn't have a vested interest in finding something big because a contractor would, even if it's subconscious. They're going to want to find big things because that's how they make their money. Handyman makes money by the hour. It's like the difference between those financial planners that get paid hourly versus commission-based. You know what I mean? The vested interest, I think, fit for that. The point being is I could go anywhere now, provided that the numbers work. And then I can find people in local, like certain rural areas are hard because there's just not as many people available, but pretty much anywhere. Yeah, for sure.
I think the big thing too that ties folks up is they get so fixated on finding that perfect market, they never buy a deal. It's just another thing that adds to that analysis paralysis. You're kind of the opposite. You're just like, hey, it's going to work in any market as long as I have these core people on my team, they're going to get it done. I think about it from a medical sense too. Like, hey, I'm the family medicine doc. I know a little bit about a lot of different things, but I need that specialist to help me out very often. And that's the same thing. It's like, hey, why would I rely on the little breadth of knowledge I have in a lot of different areas when I could call you, Dan, and you can help me with this patient? So it's the same thing in real estate. But I think sometimes it's hard to be willing to pick up the phone. We've all called those consults before. That is really difficult, but it's the same way. The bottom line is to mitigate that risk, you need to, one, be willing to take action, two, get in a community that can help you out, which you've done as well, and three, find the experts to be part of your team.
I think it's true with everything in life. There's always somebody that knows more about this than you. And if you can find that person, let that person. There's a great book by somebody named Ben Hardy and Dan Sullivan called Who Not How. Thank God I just read that book recently, but I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. You know what I mean? You ask the question, well, how is it that I can be a doctor and do all these things? Well, that's how. Like right now, there's a property manager in Denver who's taking care of all this. And all I have to do is make a phone call to him at the end of the day. Or if I'm in the ICU, I have residents. So if it's slow, I'll call him up, schedule some phone calls. How's it going? What do you need? And then I know what's going on. I don't have to do any of that stuff. I don't enjoy it either. I like the bigger picture stuff also. This is our people that investors have. Doctors were a real pain when it comes to this. Because all of us, listen, let's be honest. I tell the residents all the time, you're all very smart, okay? You're all very smart and you're all very hardworking and very dedicated. You have grit. I know that because you can't get through that miserable process for that many number of years, like giving up the greatest years of your life. All your friends in their 20s were out partying when you were studying or doing whatever. We used to do 30-hour shifts. You know what I mean? You can do that. And then you get to a point where you're telling everybody what to do and you're the expert. And so it's hard to then pull the trigger on something else.
It's true. Giving up that control is really difficult. We're such analytical people. We want to know exactly how everything works and have all the data and be able to look through it. It's hard to just take that leap. That's what hangs up folks a lot, which is why passive investing can be a great way to do it, or partnering. One thing I wanted to mention going back to kind of partnerships is that control piece from a partnership perspective, I think gets docs a lot of times. And they don't think about, well, hey, 50% of a deal is better than 0% of a deal. So just get started. Who cares if you have to give up some equity to get going? It's a great way to do it. Dan, if you don't mind sharing, what's kind of your portfolio look like now? What are you looking for things headed in the future?
We're up to 9 houses now. I've been doing this for about a year and a half or so. So we're up to 9 houses. We're starting to cash flow a lot. You know, these houses, sometimes it takes a while. Now our new houses, after all the experience, the recent ones are much better than the original ones. I was an aim, fire, ready kind of person. I wanted to learn by doing. I wanted to learn by failing. I didn't want to learn by failing, but I wanted to learn, and failing was inevitable in some things. So yeah, we're generating cash flow on these houses and we're dealing with all the problems and learning how to do all that. I've learned how to do all these things and learn how to deal with all these problems. Now we're acquiring these houses and the goal is to continue. We're getting, I think now between 100 and 200 deals in our inbox from wholesalers with the anticipation that 1 or 2 of them will be good.
Is that per month that you're looking?
Per week.
Nice.
And the goal is to get, like I said, you only need 2 things to buy a house. You need a deal and you need money. We're connecting with lenders and the hope is to continue to find more deals and find more lenders and then partner in whatever way we can.
The beautiful thing about those 2 things is if you have the deal, you'll be able to find the money. That's the key. Another important thing that you mentioned, your numbers, like 200 a week, maybe it will give you 1 to 2 viable leads. You got to get the numbers in to be able to find the deals. So that's really important too, is like, hey, what are your numbers? What are your metrics? How many deals are you analyzing to find that 1 or 2? And that's really important for folks too. You're probably not going on Redfin, Dan, and looking through houses in Baltimore and then just pick one and making it work.
I tried that. It doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly right.
Listen, most problems, it seems to me, in life can be solved by either volume or time. You either need to do more of it or you need to do it for longer or you need to wait, be more patient. This is the beauty of having equity in real estate. This Airbnb I had lost money last year because it needed a new septic system. I lost money on this house in the first year, but over 10 years, instead of making then a $400,000 profit, it'll make a $300-something thousand profit. Okay, fine, just time. The worst thing to do in a down market is sell. Time solves a lot of wounds. And volume. If I'm not getting enough deals, I gotta get more in. If I'm not, whatever, exercise, you gotta do more of it. And you have to be more patient. You don't expect returns immediately. You gotta be patient. You gotta do volume. It's just anything else in life. You want your relationships to be good. You want your health to be good. You want your finances to be good. You usually either need to do more of something or be more patient, or usually consistency and volume.
There's definitely folks that are listening to this who are saying, well, I don't have time for that. What are some ways around that you've figured out?
There is a lot of time in the day. A lot of times people get overwhelmed. If you have money, you don't have a problem. If you have money saved up, then you can find someone like me and we'll find you a deal. If you don't have the time, then you have to think about, okay, so what strategy am I going to focus on? Maybe what you have to do if you're a nurse or a doctor is, okay, I'm going to take an extra 2 shifts a month for a year or two, and I'm going to put that money away until I have enough that I can get into a deal. The other thing that you can do is, I can't do it anymore because I have 5 children and a big family, but if you don't have a family, you should be house hacking.
We still house hack our basement here in Colorado Springs.
House hacking is the greatest thing. If you can do it, you don't need money and you don't need time. You just need to find a house that's a duplex or that has a nice basement, and there you go.
We have a decent house. We have a walkout basement. It's got an electronic door lock on there. Oftentimes we never even see the guests. We got someone down there right now. They've been here for a week and a half. I've never even seen them. It covers our mortgage, taxes, and insurance. If you average it out the whole year.
You're living for free.
Yeah.
The other way to do it is you do the duplex thing. You live in one, you fix up the other one. If you have a duplex which is functional but dated, maybe you can live in one and fix it up while you rent out the other one and pay for it. Then you go find another one and you replace yourself with another tenant and you find another duplex. Or a 4-plex or a 3-plex, or whatever it is, you can keep doing that. And eventually you're building equity. Like we said before, patience and consistency. Consistency in this case is that every month you're paying, or even better, that the other people are paying. You're having a consistent build of equity that's happening constantly. Then you have something which now you can start expanding. That's the way to go. If you can pull that off, that's for sure the way to go. You get a 30-year fix, especially now the interest rates are coming down. You just have to do a little bit of effort.
And up the ante even more, you could get a physician loan or a VA loan if you're military. 0% down. My first house cost me $58 out of pocket. This house in Colorado Springs cost me nothing. And it's an infinite return. It's unbelievable. There's a lot of different ways to do it. You could also co-live in your house that you own as a resident, rent it out to all of your residency buddies.
If somebody's listening to this and they're single, literally drop everything and start looking for either a duplex or a house with a basement, and immediately just do that. If you can find a duplex in a decent neighborhood, it doesn't have to be all fixed up. Maybe it's a little dated. You have the 1990s decor. It's not HGTV. By the way, if you want to invest in real estate, never watch HGTV. Never, ever, just ever. First of all, they make everything look so pretty. They are so wrong about how much they tell you it costs to fix these things up. It is insane. They're straight up lying. I don't even know how they think they can get away with that. I guess people buy it. Never watch HGTV. You want to live in a house that's functional, that's nice, that's clean, that works, but maybe it doesn't have the granite countertops and it doesn't have the big island and stuff like that. You live in there and you get a lower rent rate, and then you rent out the other half of the duplex. You get paid, everything's paid for itself. You're building equity, you're living for free. You take that $1,500 a month you had budgeted for housing, you put that in a interest-bearing account, you let it build up, and then eventually now you have a down payment for another one. You move out, you start renting out the one that you were living in to someone else. Now that's free money that you're getting. It's free money. You need to have money in a bank to pay for capital expenditures, maintenance, things that break, and vacancies, and you go do another one. In like 5 years, you could probably do that 4 times.
Yeah.
And then you finish your training or you finish whatever, and now you own 4 cash flowing properties. By the way, 4 cash flowing duplexes changes your life forever. You're making $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 a month if there's debt on it paid off, and then $10,000 a month. And by the way, mostly and tax-free money.
It's beautiful.
It's tax-free because it's, oh my gosh.
That's what this podcast is all about. How you can utilize real estate, entrepreneurship to practice medicine and live life how you want to. You can do that through these little steps, these little things. Sure, maybe it is uncomfortable to share a house with someone for a couple of years.
You're a resident. You're not even going to be there when you care.
You rent it out to your other resident buddies, so your friends are there. You know,
the reason they call you a resident because you're a resident of the hospital. Yeah. The original residents lived in the hospital in exchange for room and board. You live there.
Exactly. And as a resident, you can get a physician loan that's no money down. So the down payment cost is nil.
You're low risk, but you're not going to be rich because you'll have a good income and you're reliable, good credit to pay your bills and all those things, but you have grit. Yeah. You don't want your credit score to drop, like all that stuff.
But if you do what we just mentioned, you will be a rich doctor one day.
Oh, yeah. Gosh, man. I wish I had a time machine. If I had the time machine and I could tell myself one thing, that I would have told myself to do. House hack.
Well, Dan, I want to be respectful of your time. What are you working on next, and how can folks reach out to you if they want to know more?
We're closing on these 2 deals, and we're looking for more deals and more lenders. I have a website called grovefamilyinvestments.com. That's like my last name, grovefamilyinvestments.com. I have a blog. I put a bunch of educational stuff. If you have questions about what's creative finance, about why I'm staying away from flipping houses right now. I just did some posts on the intricacies of sub 2 and how to close on a house. I did some videos on how to close on a house. I had a closing where there was a $24,000 mistake that we caught, and talked about how you should look at the documents and stuff like that. There's a link to the Calendly, and all my social media stuff is all linked. So it's grovefamilyinvestments.com.
Awesome. We'll be sure to include that in the show notes there. Dan, thanks so much for coming in on the Physicians and Properties podcast today. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Well, with that, it's been Dr. Dan Grove and Dr. Alex Schloe with another episode of the Physicians and Properties podcast. Signing off. Hey, real quick, if you're still listening to this, I'm assuming you got value from it. So I need your help specifically. My 2-year vision with this podcast is to help 100,000 physicians learn how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want. There are 2 main ways that a podcast grows. One is through ratings and reviews, and the other is word of mouth. If you can please leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as send this to 1 to 2 friends that you think would get value from it, we can reach the physicians that we want to reach. Thanks in advance, and talk to you on the next episode. Please note that the information shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be considered financial or medical advice. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host and the guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.